Hey everybody, I am AR Mar, and what I watched today is Reboot, Season 1, Episode 5, The Tiff. Reboot so far has been very much an episodic serial, each one fitting into a larger narrative, but primarily its own self-contained story. So you can jump in at pretty much any point, especially helped by the exposition titles, with Bob, telling us who he is, where he's from, and what his purpose is. This episode, however, goes a bit more of a sitcom formula. We start off with Dot working hard in the diner and waiting on Bob and Enzo. They're making her late for all sorts of meetings. They come in just laughing and unaware of how late they are. In this episode, Bob is shown heavily as irresponsible, while Dot is mega organized. So basically they've been put at extremes for the sake of the comedy. Bob says, it's like, you've got to react on the fly and live on the edge, and Dot, of course, is all like, no, you have to be stringently planned for every single outcome. Bob calls Dot boring, Dot calls him random, and per sitcom rules, this makes them declare, friendship is over! We are never talking to each other ever again. So, totally, yes. This done, we move over to Bob's place. Enzo calls him and tries to convince him, come back, reconcile. Bob, however, turns him down and declares, I'm so busy. I don't need Dot. I don't need the diner. I'm just too busy. I've got tons of things to do. Evidently, this is comedically juxtaposed with several shots following of him hanging around his apartment with his TV, doing precisely nothing, but, sitting on the couch and being like, so bored. Of course, he would never admit that to Dot. After a bit, his TV, a sprite in its own right, tries to cheer Bob up, playing several commercial clips. Bob throws him in the trash in response. It actually is a really funny moment of this annoying TV being thrown down the garbage chute. And then we go over to Dot. She refuses to give in to Enzo's pleading as a tear opens up in her diner. Enzo is, of course, elated, thinking this will force them to call Bob because, well, he's really the only one who can fix tears in mainframe. But no dice, little buddy, as Dot insists that she can deal with the tear herself. Unfortunately, she makes it explode, taking out the diner's door in the process. So, Enzo, fed up with the situation, heads down to the Central Command office, where him and a bunch of other mainframers are beseeching Thong to help them. Solve this dispute. Get Bob and Dot talking again, before anyone else gets hurt. Fong advises them that friendships will only be mended by tragedy or apology. And when Enzo presses him to tell him, well, what does this mean? Fong gives one of my favorite mentor lines ever. I don't know, child, but you must ponder on my words. It's almost more on the old, mentor, I meant more to sound wise than actually make any sense trope. Enzo takes this in the typical sitcom direction and sets up a fake emergency, calling for help from both Dot and Bob separately as he pretends that Megabyte has him kidnapped and in peril at the data dump. Naturally, both adults, being good if childish people, rush off to help Enzo. Unfortunately, sitcom-itis strikes them hard, as Dot and Bob bump into each other, and instead of trying to rescue Enzo, they argue about which one of them is going to rescue Enzo and do it properly. Fortunately for Enzo, Frisket gets to him just in the nick of time. No thanks to the arguing ninnies, who promptly blame each other for it instead of accepting that they're both being idiots and are at fault for Enzo almost getting killed. And Enzo's partly at fault for actually making the death trap, armed. Not a good idea for your little faking being in danger plan, man. I know it's more realistic, but dang. So, Enzo moves on to a second harebrained scheme. The old sending each fake holo cards of the other apologizing to trick them into making up. This, of course, blows up in Enzo's face right as a game starts to descend. Bob and Dot realizing that they both got cards and neither of them sent them. They start arguing, of course, as the game starts. It's a futuristic prison break game that looks awesome. The user is apparently tasked with escaping while the sprites are tasked with stopping him. Of course, since they're squabbling at the start, the user quickly gets the lead and sets the ship to blow. He even takes out the main power. And for the most part, Dot and Bob keep undercutting each other as they fight over whose methods are better. Should they follow Dot's plan, or should they just do what Bob wants and chase after the user willy-nilly? They start off with what Bob wants to do, the power having released the other prisoners. And this is one of those things in Reboot that kind of makes me wonder sometimes, because the random prisoners in this game seem to be controlled by the computer. Which kind of makes sense. I mean, if Bob and Dot are the guards, then the prisoners would obviously be enemies. It just feels weird because I don't know too many games where there's a lot of these AI enemies helping the user or us. So, and it's good for creating a dangerous situation for the protagonists, but doesn't really make a lot of sense in the trying to visualize it from our end in terms of game logic. But still, our protagonist isn't the user here, and our protagonists need a challenge. Eventually, through various events, they start to work together a bit better. And Bob finally, gets down to the power room, but he can't turn it on. It's in an ancient language, which he earlier said to Dot was completely useless. But Dot helps him over the radio. She tells him how to activate the generator, and once that's activated, Bob is able to start stopping the user, turning the awesome prison defenses against him. I mean, usually they're kind of like wacky things, like a bunch of stairs that fall out from under the user, randomly closing doors to make the user's path harder, bits like that. But they slow up the user enough for Dot to catch up and stop him. And Dot, during this part, is acting fast. She's reacting on her wits. She doesn't have time to plan because she's in the thick of it. But because Bob was following a plan, she was able to do her part. She was able to just act on the fly instead of having to worry because Bob had it. And really, in the end, at first it felt like they were trying to aggrandize Dot, give her all the credit, because, planning things ahead now was saving the day. But really, what they show is that one way of doing things needs the other to help it. A person can only really act randomly and react to a situation and act on the fly if they know that someone reliable with a plan is backing them up, creating situations to help them. So yeah, in the end, teamwork is the most important. They managed to stop the user and the self-destruct sequence of the prison with moments to spare. And having reconciled, the game leaves, and Enzo, who thinks they're never going to be friends again, is quite delighted to see that Bob and Dot are once together inseparable. So yeah, all in all, a great episode, but I really kind of was iffy about how they kind of went, super sitcom-y with this one. But not every episode of a great series can be a gem. Thank y'all for watching. I'll see you next time.